Thank you so much, Vicky, and thanks everyone for making me welcome here. So, a couple of disclaimers. One is that my journey into the field of neuroscience is only a couple of years in. So I've got down what I think is accurate, but I'm not a psychologist. So if you know better, please tell me, but I think I've been accurate. And the other is, it's not many pictures. So, and you look like a very warm and welcoming audience, so I thank you for that. So my topic today is adult literacy teaching, learning and brain science or neuroscience. And let's go right in. So housekeeping, I've got a few resources, a resource list, at the end of the presentation. I'll make that available through Vicky. I've got a blog that I've got one post in, and I've got about 10 drafts sitting in the waiting to be finished folder to be uploaded. So you could check that out. And you can contact me on Gmail as well if you're interested. So the International Specialised Skills Fellowship Institute gives out, I think, 15 fellowships over the course of the 12 months, a couple in education and some in different areas. So I was lucky enough to receive the Education Fellowship last year, which allowed me to do lots of planning and getting myself to this point this year, where I've been lucky enough to come to the UK and, as Vicky said, to Canada and the US. In the US, I started off with meeting with trauma specialists and educational psychologists, and I spoke with them at length about the topics that will unfold further in this presentation. In Canada and the UK, I'm more meeting with literacy and adult education specialists. So with all of that information, I've put this together and I'll take it home. And one thing I'm hoping to, which I will produce, not hoping to, which I'll produce from that is a sort of best practice model, which will be a 20-week program that we can insert into any curriculum that will embed these safe classroom practices into our syllabus. So as Vicky said, my name is Linno. My given name is Linda, but as an Australian, if your name's over 2 syllables, it gets changed. I'm glad some of you got the joke, because the students earlier didn't. I work at Olympic Adult Education. I've got a couple of our, starts with P, can't remember the word. Prospectus. I've got a couple of prospectuses that I'll just hand around if you're interested in having a look. So Olympic Adult Education is located in the suburb of Heidelberg West. It's a very working class area, lots of housing commission, multi-generational, poverty, lots of drug abuse and alcohol abuse and other kinds of abuse. And that's where I like to work best, because I feel like that's where we can make a difference. So when I first started working in adult education, I knew that the learners who came to us had what I perceived as baggage. And that's what I learned in my adult education courses, that students will come with baggage, and to treat those you needed to do some basic sorts of things, which is making the classroom safe, treating adults as adults with adult learner practices, respect for strengths, and a few of the other things I'm sure that you're all familiar with as well. But what I didn't understand was that the baggage was actually trauma, and that trauma has a whole science behind it that we can work with, and we can change the way of our practices in the classroom and change the way that students and learners receive that practice, and that they can change, and that we can change. So sometimes I'll say they when I'm referring to students, and when I'm referring to people who have experienced trauma, But I don't mean to discount that many of us in this room also have experienced trauma, and that the they is also an us. And I just want to put that out there. So we know that people who have literacy issues are everywhere, and it crosses all class, cultures, socioeconomic, all those barriers. We also know that in Australia, the people who come to the adult community education centres are the people who don't have access to the other solutions. So they don't have an easy pathway into employment, and they don't have familial support that will allow them to get a job in their family business, or to go on to have maybe privately paid support in vocational education or whatever. So the people who come to us are the people who I've said before, experience multi-generational poverty, addiction, and so on. So when I talk about multiple and complex needs, these are the issues that we are used to dealing with, and I'm sure it's the same for you as well. So I'm just thinking about the students that I work with, and how many of them have these multiple of these issues who front up every day, and how difficult it must be for them to come to adult education every day and come to their classes and know that they've got a lot of debt sitting behind them, and know that they've got children who need to get to school but haven't got the right shoes, or other issues like this happening. And I can think off the top of my head about several students who present to me with some of those issues as acute and urgent and requiring immediate assistance. So Olympic Adult Education is co-located in Banyule Community Health. Banyule is the local government area, and the community health building is quite large, and Olympic Adult Education has a little corner at the back. So we're really lucky in that we've got social workers, psychologists, dental, doctors, nurses in the same building. But we're actually treated a bit like we're the outside. So we don't have open access to those other parts of the organisation, even though you think we would. But sometimes we can get in. It's all about who you know, isn't it? So I'm just thinking about one of our students who, she has, she gets phoned up by those people who say, you're going to win $1,000 if you do this, and she gets really hooked into winning more money and all of that sort of stuff, and she is always in debt, and how difficult that is for her, and how many times she's come to the office crying and asking to borrow money, and how we can't lend her money, and how difficult it must be for her to sit in the class and be learning while that's playing in the back of her mind. So when I started to learn about trauma, is when I recognised that, as I said before, that's what the baggage was about. And when I realised that baggage was trauma, I realised that I could see in myself what had happened to me many years ago when I first started out at Teachers College. The year before I finished my Year 12, Form 6, and my father died at the end of that year. And so my father died. My mother had to leave the family home to get work. My brother went to live in the other side of the country. My sister went to live with my nana. My other sister went to live with my auntie. So the family just got spread asunder, and it was like my whole world collapsed. I went to Teachers College where I had to live there because it was 60 miles away. didn't know anyone. I just went to jelly, and I didn't understand what was happening at all. I knew my father died. I knew that I was very obviously upset about that, but I couldn't make sense of what happened to the rest of me, because it didn't seem to add up. That, you know, I couldn't understand what my schoolwork was about. My father died. That didn't seem to be 1 + 1 = 2, but I understand now that it was. So when my lecturer asked me to come into her office and have a talk about my essay, which was about symbolism, and she said to me, what does symbolism mean? And I couldn't explain it to her. I just felt stupid, and I felt like I didn't belong, and that everyone else belonged, but I was this kid from the country, and because I was from the country, it meant that educational standards were lower, and they were them, they were higher standards, so I just ended up dropping out. But I understand now it was trauma. I'm happy to understand it like that. So the very least that our adult students come to the classroom with is the stigma of having adult literacy issues. So when we talk about trauma, we can talk about it as big T and little t trauma. The little t's are the distressing incidents that we go through life and endure, and the big T's are the big things like death in a family, sexual assault. I'm sure you know all the other things. Does anyone want to yell out some ideas? Big T traumas? Yeah. Well, a car crash can be both, really. I don't know who said it. Oh, thanks. Yeah, car crash can be minor. I had a car crash last year. It was on grand final day. What do you have here for grand final? The football final? What's it called? Hey? Yeah, like the FA Cup. So it was the grand final of our footy. And I don't know which was more distressing, missing the footy grand final or having the car crash. But the car crash was minor. But yeah, it can be fatal, and that would be terrible. Would be both. Yeah. So that's a good example.
Can I just ask Linno then? So are you defining big T trauma? You've said it's like life-threatening or near life-threatening.
Yeah.
Would it not be like ongoing events as well? So like in the media here at the minute they're talking about children who have alcoholic parents, would that be categorised as big T or little t?
It would be big T because it's systematic, and so if your parent came home drunk and they started yelling at you, it would be a traumatic event. But if it wasn't something that was ongoing or quite regular occurrence, it would be a traumatic experience. But if it was all the time, it would definitely be a big T. Any other questions? So what we do know about trauma is that it's processed through the whole body. It's a holistic experience. So we receive the trauma through our eyes, our ears, our nose, our taste, and the feeling of it. So when we experience a traumatic event, that will come back to us through those senses. So if you were in a terrible car crash and you were eating something at the time, you may not ever want to eat that again. The smell would make you feel sick, the taste would, the sight of it, the sound of it crunching, if it's crunchy. The little trauma things that may have the same effect but for a smaller period of time. So triggers for educators. What do we know our students to be like when they're in the classroom if we feel like they're not in a grounded space? So for some students who've gone through school and they've been regularly told they're wrong, they're dumb, they're stupid, they're not going to amount to anything, they'll never get a job, seeing red pen on work handed in from the teacher, crosses, not kisses, being called out to answer questions without volunteering, reading aloud. Probably most of us know this already. And interpersonal relationships in the classroom that can go wrong. That photo is in Canada with Jenny Horseman, who's written about violence and education, and some of her colleagues. So when students react in the classroom in a dysregulated state, so regulated is sort of calm and dysregulated is either high or low, but that will come later. They are using old responses to respond to something that's happening now. So it's outdated, and we need to bring them into a safe space so that they know that they're in a safe space and they need a different reaction or different response. So understanding how the brain works will help us get to that place. Neuroplasticity explains it as what fires together, wires together. So if the student has heard from teachers over and over how stupid they are, or wrong, or whatever, that's going to create a neural pathway in their mind, just like a road map that sits on top of their prefrontal cortex, and that will stay there and be built on and built on and built on until something else comes along to disconfirm that and replace it with a new neural network pathway, which is what we're going to do when we make the safe learning space for them. So in order to move from staying in that zone of learning is fraught with danger, we have to create new positive experiences. To do that, we need to really be present and to listen in a present way. That's me taking a very safe risk, learning to surf. No waves. So some of the signs of trauma or dysregulation in the classroom, and if we think about it as being blue, so blue is cold and red is hot. So blue are the people who sort of stare out the window and vague off, and red are the people who are quite anxious and highly in a high affect. So they're talking all the time, interrupting, jiggling their legs, all of that sort of stuff. There we go, here's some explanations. So what we want to do is to get our students, and ourselves actually, because we know that we also get nervous and dysregulated, into the green zone. So that's a secure space where we can listen, we can make eye contact, we can take in more bits of information than just one, and we have space from the inner critic. So the polyvagal theory is a theory developed by Dr. Stephen Porges. The polyvagal theory, there's three sort of lines from the polyvagal theory. So the polyvagal theory is a nervous system, sorry, I've lost it. Not the nervous system, it's the oh, don't worry. The polyvagal system I can explain like this. So there's three systems, 2 red and 1 green. So the green is safe, it's the ventral vagal, it's the front. So it's in the cranial nerve as well. So it starts off here and it's all the way down the front of the body. So if you remember the V of the heart, you can remember the ventral vagal. So it's located in our heart and our faces and our brain, front brain. So if you want someone to go to the green space, you make eye contact, you talk in a calm voice, you listen to them, you can do some singing because that's really calming. If you introduce some singing in the classroom, you can just do some meditation or some mindfulness. So just bringing some really calm activity to the classroom. And that brings everyone to the same space. If we go into the other side, the other activated state, which is part of the danger, so it's the flight and fright. So the flight and fright is when the person sees danger and gets ready to fight. So it might be the student who you say to them, it's time to hand in your work, and they haven't been doing their work all class, and instead of saying, I didn't do any, they'll say, well, you know, you didn't give me enough time, or something like that. So they're ready to fight, or else they'll try and slip out behind everyone else. They're ready to flee. The other part of the polyvagal theory is the dorsal vagal. The dorsal vagal, I remember that by remembering that the shark has a dorsal fin on the back, and that's the fin. So I think of Jaws, and if a shark got me in its mouth, I would definitely be playing dead if I wasn't already dead. So that's what happens if you are in the dorsal mode. You just play dead because you're so freaked out. Any questions about that? What can make a difference? That's the lovely bunch of people I work with. It's about a third of them. It's my boss in the red shirt telling me to get off the chair, that it was bad OHS. So literacy teachers, educated in brain science and trauma. Positive experiences in the classroom, collaborative work with students, positive interpersonal relationships, and teaching self-regulation methods and co-regulation. So when we have students like my friend at Olympic Adult Education called Beryl, who comes into the classroom and is ready for the teacher to tell her that she's doing something wrong before she even gets to the classroom, she's just waiting for that. So the minute the teacher looks at her in a way that she can interpret as, I'm in trouble, she leaves the classroom. She's more often than not crying, and she'll come past my office, and if I'm sitting there, she'll come in. If I'm not able to see her, I won't see her, but if she comes in, I make sure I put everything down and I just sit with her and be present with her, because it works really quickly just to be present with her and to listen to what she's talking about and reassure her that she's not in trouble. And what I really like to do with her when I go home is to teach her about self-regulation, so that we know that when she's leaving the classroom crying that she's in a 10, but if we can pinpoint the time where she's ramping up to the 10, when she's at a 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever, then she can interrupt that and then go back to the classroom and do something that will stop her from ramping up to the 10. Like maybe she recognises that when she starts to get a feeling in her tummy that she's, that she knows that that's going to lead to that. So she can take some space, she can go and get a drink of water, she can come and see me before she starts crying. Anything to sort of interrupt that and to interrupt those brain patterns, like we said before, and she can have a much more positive experience of herself and herself as a learner. So in my trip I've talked a lot. Every person I've talked to, we've talked about safe classrooms and how important that is, but we've mostly talked about it on an emotional level. And then when I went to Canada, I met with literacy educators, and one of the people we met with had just taken sabbatical, and she's doing learning design at uni. So started talking about the design of classrooms and how important that is. And one of the classrooms I work in has got no windows. It's too hot in the winter. It's too cold in the summer. It's like crazy. I'm sure you've got those kinds of rooms as well. And so we were talking about what we could do to make that different. And some of the things we thought of were, you know, painting a window mural on the wall, bringing some furnishings in from home, maybe some favourite things in to make it feel like there's some ownership of the classroom in that space. It's how important is ownership of the space to our students. And one of the teachers said that she actually makes morning tea for her students and offers them a cup of tea. I thought, wow, what a lovely thing to do. When I interview students who are coming to the program for the first time, one of the things I start with is, what are you good at and what are you interested in? And I think that's another one of those disconfirming moments where their experience of school isn't what they get when they come to the adult learning environment. So we're not starting off with, what do you need help with? We're not starting with a deficit model. We're looking at their strengths. What are you good at? What are you interested in? They can talk then. They're not, you know, they're sort of disarmed by it, and they can talk about what they like and what they want to do, where they want to go. It's so important to experience success. I think all of us really like to be seen. I know I really value it when people actually see who I am and make an effort to acknowledge that. And the same for our students. If we can remember names, greet each one, know that that's their place as well as our place. My resource list that's available to you, and with thanks to all of the people and organisations listed for my trip, and a lovely picture of your beautiful city taken this morning. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Linno. We'll take some questions now. Any questions from anybody to Linno? John?
I'll start.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Two things were kind of going through my head when you were talking, and I think they're probably questions that you get asked a lot in this kind of work, which is the relationship between being a teacher and an educator and being a counsellor or an advocate, and the space you're creating is to enable the adults to learn, and it's how you negotiate those different relationships, because there's always the possibility, isn't there, that by inviting people in and being as person-centred as you were describing, the point when you switch to being a tutor may reawaken some of those negative feelings that you described, the traumas. So I'd be fascinated to hear what kind of conversations you have. And the second observation is the extent to which, you know, you were describing the young woman who left the room, the extent to which it's okay to be angry and distressed if you're reliving something, or rather, is it okay? And the extent to which is there a danger of needing to contain those emotions and those feelings. And is part of what you're trying to do to enable them to contain them sufficiently so they can do whatever they need to do, but in another circumstance they can let go. I suppose they're about enabling the individuals to appreciate and get some of the things that you're saying, really. That last bit was a bit rambly, sorry.
I think I get it. So I'll start backwards. I know that student has a psychiatrist and a psychologist that she sees regularly. So I feel like she's taken care of, so in that particular example. But generally, I would say if I didn't know her that well and didn't know that she had that support system already in place, I would ask if she did or if he did, and if not, I would ask her, I would find out if she wanted to do that and refer onwards as much as I was able. And the first question, which was about disclosing. Oh yeah. Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question, and I know that lots of people have got different ideas about that. My personal thoughts are that the classroom is a teaching space and learning space, and I'm really careful to shut down anyone who's about to disclose too much personal stuff in front of anyone else in the classroom. But I make sure to check in with them later and also to have a conversation with them about what was happening. And I know that some students have come to me and disclosed some traumas that have required expert help, and I've made sure to refer those on. Yeah, because to have a safe space in the classroom, if someone was to disclose, that's not safe for them, that's not safe for the other people who may be triggered as well. So it's really not caring for anyone if you just allow willy-nilly triggering and disclosures all over the place. Does that answer your question? Yep.
Thank you. Any further questions? Kate?
Have you ever tried movement? Because I believe it could become habitual, the way that you hold yourself in response to trauma, and that can be carried through for a long time. Have you ever tried movement to dispel that?
A couple of times, not as an ongoing practice, but I'm going to write that down and put it in my notes to remember to put that in. Yeah, because I think there's so much power in the somatic. So the somatic is the body, and trauma is held in the body. And yeah, somatic therapies are really great on moving trauma. I haven't thought about that in the classroom in this regard, but it's a great idea. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, just wondering, do you talk to your students about what you're doing and why you're doing it?
I haven't talked to them about the project. I've spoken to them about the project, but not in depth. Like I've said, I'm going on this big trip and finding out more about adult literacy and trauma, but I haven't. That's all I've talked about.
But that's a really interesting question, because I think that links, Linno, to consciousness raising and speaking about the learners sharing their stories. So is there a space in your classroom where learners can share their stories, and then stories become narratives that can empower other learners who perhaps are experiencing trauma? So the stories are, and the learners become role models.
I'm part of VELBEC, which is Victorian Adult Literacy Basic Education Council. I think I've got some cards in my bag. And so we're an umbrella organisation or a peak organisation for adult literacy teachers and practitioners in other ways. And a couple of years ago we put out a book called Do you know, Vicky? Do you remember it?
Learner voices.
Learner Voices?
Yeah, it was around learner voices.
Something. Yeah, it's definitely about that, but can't remember the. Anyway, so that was about 7 learners who told their stories, and it was told to a writer who wrote it down in a narrative, coherent narrative. And so in that way, that provides that kind of example. And definitely in classroom examples, I think being able to tell your story is a really powerful way of having a voice and writing it down and illustrating it. I often work with zines. Do you know zines? Anyone know zines? So, great. Yes? Yeah. So a zine is just like the end of magazine, and it's a small run, like maybe you'll make 5, maybe 2, maybe 50. Sometimes people sell them, but they're always of personal interest or nature. And so my students make zines about something they're interested in, or else they might make it about their lives.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to say I'm really interested in the idea of creating a safe space. But sometimes those who have suffered or continue to endure trauma are the ones that don't come to it. How are the pathways laid out for those students to actually attend to those safe spaces that you create? Are they some pathways that you can encourage us to use?
So do you mean how do we encourage them to attend adult learning?
Yeah.
Gee, that's a really hard question, because it boils down to funding for me. And funding is, I don't know about you, but it's hot political potato. And so we work with the governments as much as we can to try and lobby for secure funding. And we do have one form of funding that means that students can attend and not have to do certificate or accredited classes. And I think that works really well. There's no testing. There's, the fees are like $60, which is 30 quid a year. I can't believe I just said quid. It's really affordable and accessible. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, just a brief one. That was very fascinating. Can I ask you, I may misunderstand the dynamics within the classroom. Clearly, you are aware of, you talked about trauma and trigger points, etc. Now, if this is a quite sizable class, 5, 6, 7 people, so the trigger points are all different. Everybody has different trauma. Is this model mainly about you, the relationship between you and a student, or is this actually also usable for the various dynamics that are going on in between the students? Because clearly they're interacting as well. They may actually trigger each other. This is a very simplistic way of putting it. So I wonder how much does this model apply not just to the relationship you have with the students, but also within the classroom? This is the global classroom model.
Well, I'd really like it to be where students can co-regulate each other. So, I guess it will be trial and error. I know when I first started, I was working with 2 young men who were both in their 20s and both experienced different kinds of bullying at school, and then they came to the adult learning centre and they brought with them that sort of, I've been bullied for this reason, I've been bullied for that reason, and they sort of turned on each other. And I found it so difficult because they were adults, young adults, but they were adults and they behaved like teenagers, and I just couldn't make the connect with them. And so if I was to work with them now, I would hope that I would find a way to help them to help each other in that way, maybe by finding something in common that they had that they could work on together, or I don't know. I've thought a lot about them since I've started this trip, and yeah, I'd really like to find some answers to that, because I think that's really a difficult space with the young adults.
And it's interesting, because it's about creating an environment based on terms within the neoliberal landscape that was discussing earlier. And with the neoliberal landscape, it's all about accredited course, competition within the classroom, funding issues. So if we look at terms that are traditionally feminised, for instance, notions of caring, these terms have always been, well, are undervalued within the neoliberal framework. And it's about, as teachers, reclaiming these terms, reclaiming caring. So to create a space where learners, you give the example, Linno, when learners walk into the classroom, you greet them, it's a safe environment where they feel valued because you know them. You know their stories, the motivations for them coming into the classroom as adults, and you value them. And these are simple terms: value, care, hope, but they're powerful. And you spoke about the small t and big T, and we can speak about the small p and the big P in relation to political. And by reclaiming a language that can test these neoliberal terms, and by ensuring that we can create safe spaces where care is enacted and where learners feel, after experiencing trauma, many of them experiencing trauma that perhaps hasn't surfaced for many years, but in a safe space they can flourish. And you just want to share with us, Linno, an experience of one of your learners that has come and they have had traumatic experiences, but they've flourished. Sure, please.
I'd love to do that. So the same class that I was talking about, the two young men, there was another young man who was probably around approaching 30, and he had, I admired him. He had a lot of interrupted schooling. His parents moved around a lot in the country of Australia, and he described himself as barely literate. I personally don't use the binary of illiterate, literate, and I just think, literacy is about social reading. So anyway, he described himself like that, and when he came to my class, mine and my colleague Jane, he was the things he would read would be the stop signs, the signs in the public arena, like telephone booth, that kind of thing. He wrote his name and address from the healthcare card in the government healthcare card. He stayed with us for a couple of years, and he got sober through AA, and he totally flourished. And years later, he became a drug and alcohol worker at TAFE, by doing a Certificate 3. And I don't know, yes, we worked hard with him, but he worked hard. He was totally motivated, and he had a lot of stuff in his history, like he got kicked out of schools, he went to the schools for the kids who were troubled, all that kind of stuff. But by the time he came to us, I think it was that real transformational learning experience where he'd peeled off the layers and he was ready to challenge the foundations of his self-belief and move on. And I think he did that so beautifully. And to then go into a vocation where he's giving back to others, I thought, he's really come full circle, and I just admire him so greatly. Yeah.
Any other questions? I did see over here there was a hand up earlier.
It was me, but it was answered.
All right. Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Linno, from all of us for coming and sharing your fellowship and your journey. To thank I4P for providing this opportunity. It's been absolutely a real pleasure to have you here, and this is from all of us at Edge Hill University. Thank you so much.